Hello, and welcome to our webinar on how to mitigate the risk of a product failure by optimizing your lab's materials testing software. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Nick Erickson, your host for this webinar. Today, I'm joined by Dan Caesar, the product manager for all of Instron's static testing software. And as part of today's discussion, Dan will be demonstrating the traceability module, which is an add-on for our BlueHill Universal software, specifically designed around meeting various audit requirements common to highly regulated labs found in safety critical industries. Dan will introduce the main features of traceability, but more importantly, he will outline the value traceability can add to your lab through a few slides and then a live demonstration in the software. We're also joined by Meredith Bernstein, one of our applications engineers, who will join Dan once we get into the demonstration portion. She's also going to be keeping an eye on questions while Dan is presenting. I encourage you to submit any questions you might have here as we go along. Some of which Meredith will respond to directly via chat, and others we'll save for the end during the Q&A session. So with that said, I'm going to turn things over to Dan now.
All right, thanks Nick, and welcome again to everyone who is on the call. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to listen and to learn about one of Instron's newest and most exciting products. And I really hope that the next hour helps make traceability's value a bit more tangible to everyone on the call. So just to outline what's ahead, I want to walk through a quick agenda. We're going to start by introducing traceability for those who are not familiar. And the best way to do this is to briefly discuss its main features and how BlueHill's existing security model plays an integral role in the workflow. And then we're going to look at how those features actually provide value to a lab, both from a more generic point of view and specifically if product failure poses a risk to your organization. Once everyone has a decent idea of what traceability is, I'll then be joined by my colleague Meredith to do a little bit of role playing and a live demo to highlight a particular use case of traceability. And then the demo will be followed by walking through some lessons learned and then just some important things to consider when thinking about traceability. And then finally, as Nick alluded to, Meredith and I will try to field as many questions as we can before our time runs out today. All right, so let's get started. And before jumping into traceability, it's important that we set the foundation with a standard feature in BlueHill, being security. And security allows the manager to configure permissions in the software, granting access and limiting access where needed. So again, this is standard to BlueHill Universal, and it's a simple framework of permissions and users. And when security is enabled, the logged in user will be limited to their designated permissions. So whether they can run tests or whether they can edit methods or even configure system settings would all depend on that user's permissions. And I'm not going to walk through all of these today. The list extends well beyond what you see here. And then depending on what is preferred, BlueHill also offers different security modes. And again, I don't want to spend time going through each of these modes, as we have some very useful collateral online explaining each security mode. And I believe we even have an entire webinar if anyone wants to get all the details in terms of our security offering. But it is worth mentioning that permissions are flexible, meaning that you can certainly lock things down to prevent users from doing anything beyond what they should be doing. Or if you need things to be a bit looser, permissions can be configured accordingly. And the reason why I'm talking about security right now is because it is fundamental to our traceability module. And this is because users logging in and out of the software, it allows the software to track who is performing actions on the system. So the who is one variable, but what they did, when did they do it, why did they do it, and being able to prove all of this is really the essence of what traceability enables users to do. So let's introduce the three main features of traceability itself. The first is revision history, which allows you to view a full history of method files, sample files, and report template files. The second is electronic signatures, which ensures revisions to methods and test results are reviewed. And the third is the audit trail, which is integrated into Bluehill. It tracks system level usage, additions, modifications, and deletions in a secure and searchable audit trail. And I have screenshots in the following slides to show you what these actual features look like in the software. But before we go to them, like why are these things useful? I mean, together at a high level, they protect the integrity of results produced by your lab to deliver superior products, which is particularly important in safety critical applications. All right, so let's look at some of those screenshots. And we're gonna move a little bit pretty briefly through these because some of the things that you'll see in these screenshots are gonna be repeated in the live demo. But to start off, we'll talk about revision history. And it can be accessed through a new clock looking icon that sits on the top right bar of icons, as you can see. And when you click the icon, a window pops up and all revisions and their changes listed with the affected item, what the previous value was, what the new value is, the timestamp of when the revision occurred, who actually saved that revision, all is shown in this view. So if you click signatures, you move to a second tab where you can actually review who has signed the current revision and maybe any comments that they have made. So now this is all referring to, and the screenshots are showing the revision history of a method, but the very same idea applies to sample files and to report template files. So you'll have the same icon, you have the same windows that will open up and show you the revision history for those file types as well. So our next feature is electronic signatures. And shown here, when an operator finishes their test sample, they're given a chance to review the results and sign off using their credentials that the test went well. And if they need to enter any comments, they can do so. And this sign off acts as the first, or what we call the primary signature for this file. When a secondary or even tertiary approval is required, it is performed in the traceability section of the admin tab. And you can see here that there is a review section where items waiting for review are collected until a user navigates to the screen to review them. And not any user can perform these reviews. There are new security permissions that enable particular users, select users, to perform both secondary and tertiary signatures. And in addition to the new permissions, these signature settings themselves are flexible as well. So what I mean by this is that each Bluehill file type can be configured to require no signatures at all, or one signature, two signatures, and up to three, or that tertiary signature. So depending on what your lab needs in terms of locking things down and oversight for different file types, that it's very flexible. The final feature is the integrated audit trail, which is found right underneath reviews. Again, it's in the traceability section of admin. And here users can search for specific entries using filters if you have a certain date range in mind, or maybe you have a particular user in mind that you can filter on a number of different things. Also, if you need to print out a portion of, or maybe the entire audit trail itself, you can do so right from the screen. So I've reviewed these four elements that work together to give us traceability, but how does this really follow through with value to the lab? So I'm sure some ideas began to pop into your head as I was talking, but let's walk through 3 specific benefits. The first being improved data integrity. So there are many opportunities for human error in life, but specifically in material testing. So whether you might enter the wrong specimen dimensions, maybe you are using the wrong test method, maybe you've changed the unit of a particular result. An operator can grip a specimen incorrectly. Maybe a manager fails to flag a sample that was tested that had bad results. That really the integrity of the lab's results depends on using tools and setting up processes to mitigate the risks of these errors from occurring. So while traceability has no impact on how well a operator is going to grip a specimen, it certainly does give labs a higher level of confidence in their test methods and results. And the foolproof integration of traceability into Bluehill will make an auditor's job quite simple as they assess your testing process. The second benefit is staying informed of changes as they happen. So it can be frustrating and even panic inducing if someone discovers that a method has been changed. So in that case, a lab essentially has to perform an investigation and determine why and when the change occurred. If traceability had been used though, the audit trail could quickly be searched to find the very moment the change occurred. Or even better, if signatures were configured, the change could have been rejected before anyone even ran any tests. So in this case, obviously, I'm referring to a change that is not desirable. People make changes that are desirable all the time, but a lot of times accidental or incidental changes can have a negative impact on a lab's output. And a small aside that I think is worth mentioning here is that customers who have purchased traceability from us have said that the oversight of who is running tests, so the users who are running tests and simply the number of tests is great data to track operator training progress as well as just general system usage. A third dimension of value involves liability. So having indisputable evidence that tests were run appropriately and results are valid can prove crucial if the situation ever arises. Also, if an error is identified, being able to track back when it was introduced and what was actually changed is very important to scope the potential impact of that error. So let's expand on this ominous threat that weighs on many test labs, especially those that are relied on for testing products headed into safety critical markets. A less than sufficient quality product, or whatever you want to call it, failed product, defective, imperfect, that it really is an inevitability in the manufacturing world. And it's really the reason why quality control testing exists. So I'll try to frame a product failure by using 3 increasingly troublesome events and how traceability can help. So on a regular basis, labs will unknowingly test a sample of defective product. But in this case, with traceability, we can trust testing will catch the problem as the method is controlled and the results are regularly signed off. But maybe the inevitable escape occurs and the product actually fails in the field in the hands of a consumer. So this can certainly bring a little panic to the organization and definitely add some pressure to the lab. But again, traceability is there to help. You'll be able to efficiently determine if a test was wrongfully approved or if a method was modified in a way that skewed results. So in both of these cases, the impact of the errors could be determined by maybe how many approvals were botched or how many tests were run with the skewed data. If the test showed no signs of issue and was properly approved, then it's likely that this defective product's batch was only partially impacted. So maybe this would suggest that the testing sample size per batch is just too small, and your company could, your lab could make a shift to potentially test more samples from that batch. The most severe circumstance is when an escape occurs due to damages caused by the defective product, your company gets sued. So although this is far from ideal, evidence proving a valid test was performed by a compliant testing process will be very useful to combat any liability charges, and traceability can provide that proof. I'd argue that these benefits apply to nearly all test labs, but realistically, they do apply to some more than others. An audit trail and electronic signatures are both requirements for some highly regulated industries. For instance, biomedical companies have to comply with an FDA regulation called 21 CFR Part 11, which has driven many of those labs to convert from paper records to digitizing things, which traceability provides the ability to do. All right, so that was the initial upfront slides. Now we're going to shift gears slightly into this live demo. My colleague Meredith is going to join us in a moment, but I want to try to set the stage for the demo. We're going to do a little bit of role playing. So I will be acting as a lab manager for a lab that's been testing polymers to one of the most common plastic standards in the world, ISO 527. And Meredith is going to be playing a lab tech, so a very experienced user of Blue Hill Universal, someone that runs tests, but also kind of manages some of the methods and trying to make the methods more efficient. And the kind of point in time that we are in with this lab is we've been using Blue Hill Universal for a couple of years, that we had heard about traceability, and we had upgraded and purchased traceability just a number of months ago, and have had the initial setup, and our operators are trained. That due to kind of my oversight of the lab, if we look at the current traceability settings that I've set up, is that we actually don't require any signatures or approval for report templates, methods, samples, and really the only thing in terms of a secondary approval that I want to see is the actual results that are coming out of this batch testing. So while we have specs in place to allow the operators to judge whether or not a test has passed or failed, that I like to take a look at the data myself, look at the curves, make sure that everything is good before we give it the okay. So I think Meredith is actually in the middle of a sample right now. I think she's just finishing that up. So I am going to hand things over to her at this point in time. And I just need to give her access to my screen.
All right. Looks like, okay, I have control now, great. So like Dan said, I'm in the middle of running my batch of 8 specimens, and I've currently tested 7 out of 8. So I'm gonna go in and make sure I type in my dimensions for specimen 8 here. Let's see, there we go. And then I'll press start to run my last test. So like Dan mentioned, you know, our lab is currently transitioning into using traceability. Previously, our process here is I would finish my batch of 8, then I would print off the PDF results, and I would walk up to his desk, deliver a piece of paper, wait for him to sign off, and then this would get filed away. So with traceability, my new process is all I have to do is sign off digitally, and once I finish my report, it'll automatically get added to that queue that Dan showed on a slide, and we'll revisit again in a minute. And at the end of the day, Dan can come down to the system and check over all of the reports directly within Blue Hill Universal. He also then has access to the audit trail, and he can see who was running the tests, what time we ran the tests, and then electronically sign off. So we're really excited about this new workflow. It really removes, streamlines it and removes some unnecessary complication. So now that I've run all 8 here, I'm going to go press finish on this sample. And when this pops up, we'll be able to see all of the changes that were made since the file was last saved, as well as a preview of the report. And this is where I can check off to make sure that this is in spec. Oh, Bluehill's taking a minute here. Is it on, pop up on another monitor, Dan?
Yep, I will grab that for you. That's what was happening. All right, can you see it?
Perfect. Yep. All right, now I can see it. Great. So we can see on the left here all of the pending changes. So these are all of the actions that have happened in this sample since it was last saved. So Dan can take a look at all of that when I submit this for review. And then I can also take a look at my report, which is being submitted. So I'm going to scroll down here and take a look at my mean for my tensile strength. And yep, this looks okay. This is within our spec for what we want the mean value for the entire batch to look like. Currently, we have, a reference table that on a piece of paper that we keep at the machine. So I'll cross-reference that. This looks okay to me. So I can type in a comment on here that just says, the mean value, okay. And I'll sign in with my username and my password in order to sign off on this. When I press save, this will now get submitted to Dan. And then it'll take its time, but it'll get submitted to Dan. There we go. And then I don't want to start another sample. I'm done for the day. I'm going home. And now it's Dan's time to come down and take a look at the reports that I've submitted to him.
All right.
So this will bring me back. Yep, there we go.
So Meredith, kind of the workflow, since we have users in place, that our operators will log out of their profile. We have obviously a number of processes going with the webinar, so I think some of the loading is taking a little bit longer, but we'll get back to the login screen and let's see, can you go back home at this point? Yeah, cool. And I'll log Meredith out. Normally she's leaving, so she would be doing this herself. And now as manager, I want to just take a look at some of the testing that maybe occurred in the last couple of days. So I'm going to log in. And as I said before, to perform some of these reviews and look at things that are going on, that I'll go into the traceability module that sits in our admin module. So we'll try to see we're going to specifically look at the test that Meredith just saw, but I can maybe look at some other testing that a couple different operators had been looking at or had been performing in the last day or so. So if I jump into the traceability module itself, it's querying the database and kind of populating outstanding items that need to be reviewed, like we talked about. So here's just a short list that's in the bucket that you can see. Yesterday I didn't get a chance to look at some testing that was done by Owen. Meredith had also done a test, but if we look at some of those results that were produced yesterday, that the curves all look consistent, and the data itself looks good. You can see that Meredith signed off as a primary signature. That, in my view, looking at the mean value, but then also the curves, that's kind of the consistency I want to see. So I'll say everything looks great, and I'll put in my own credentials and then approve that particular item. So you can see that now, rather than having 3 items that one's been removed. That if we required tertiary approval, that we would have Meredith had 1, I had the 2nd, and then it would still be sitting here for review. But because I just had the secondary approval, it wouldn't allow me to also do the tertiary. That you'd have to have a separate person come in to review that particular item. But that's not how our lab operates. That now, if I look specifically at, so this is, if I look at the timestamp, we're on the East Coast in Boston, which it is 11, right around 11:20. So this is the sample that Meredith just submitted. And I can see that, yeah, this is the one batch that she ran today. It's waiting for my secondary approval. And then depending on which one you're selecting, you'll see the actual details. So here, again, similar to how Meredith was viewing the file before she gave the first signature, that I can review the same exact file, and I can see that she signed off, that she was correct. The tensile strength is good, but as I'm looking at this, I actually am a little bit concerned because there's clearly 2 groupings of curves, which is not something that we typically see out of our polymers. So out of a batch of 8, this is a little bit concerning from my point of view, that the distribution is typically a lot tighter. So I'm actually questioning the test that Meredith just ran. So I'm not going to approve this at this point in time. I'm going to try to do a little bit of digging and actually look into the sample itself. And something that we can do now with traceability, we can go and look at the audit trail, and we can view the sample's revision history directly from the audit trail itself. So let's see, I think I have a couple, I only have 7 entries right now because I'm looking at things that were just submitted today. But if I open that up to all dates to try to give everyone a better look at what the entire audit trail looks like, that, yeah, maybe you have 500 or 600 entries pretty early on into using the software itself. That right now, there is no filters. It's showing all types of entries, which is okay. But realistically, I'm trying to find when that sample was created. So I can see that she submitted the PDF here. That exact sample is batch, this 3/25/21 batch 1, and she actually created the sample here and modified it here. Okay, so this is actually where she actually ran all of the specimens, and you can see that as she was testing on the system, that everything that she was doing is getting tracked. So every specimen she was modifying the width and the thickness, so that's good. I know she's not just putting the default value in there, and it looks like that's changing over time, and it tells you when the specimen was tested. So if I go down, and let's try to find any explanation for that that difference. So this is really all just thickness and width, but here actually, this is very unusual, that it says for the 5th specimen, she actually changed the ramp speed, so the speed of the crosshead, from, it's always supposed to be 5 millimeters a minute, but for some reason she set it to 2, and I think that might have held for the remainder of the specimen. So if I go back, specimen 5, if I keep that in my head and I look at the PDF, does that actually line up? That it looks like the first, yeah, so the first 4 were high, and it seems like the next 4 are low, and it's switching over on that 5th specimen. And I can also see that in the test results, that on the 5th one, you can see that all of a sudden that my tensile strength is dropping. And if I look at these numbers, these are actually below spec. So this is exactly what I was thinking might be a problem. But it seems like the source of the problem is not actually the material itself. It seems like we might have accidentally changed the rate. And if you pull something at 2 millimeters a minute versus 5 millimeters a minute, that you're gonna see a difference in results. So especially for how rigid our plastics are. So I think I found the problem. I'm not too worried about it because it seems like it's just isolated to this one sample. But from this point, I think I got to do some brainstorming as to how we're going to actually prevent this from happening in the future. And right off the bat, a couple things come to mind, at least from my point of view, being the lab manager. And that's kind of permission based and traceability based. So the first is traceability, that I had referred to our signatures that we had set up in the past, that I can potentially change these. So report templates, that's not anything involved, but rather than having none in terms of my methods, that I might think about changing this to a primary or maybe a secondary, again, level of approval for any changes and revisions to methods. But I don't know if that's actually going to help me for this case, because the method Meredith was using, she didn't actually overwrite that. She was using the same one that we had set up quite a long time ago. And that's just how I think that we allow potentially this error to occur if someone's not paying attention. So I'm not sure if this is going to do it. The other thing that I'm thinking of is permissions. But again, so I can go into security, I can look at the users who I have in my lab, and I can go into Meredith and I can see that she has certain permissions, and she can test specimens, she can edit methods. That again, I'm not sure that this is going to be the best approach, because realistically, Meredith is probably the best person on our lab for creating test methods and editing test methods. So I'm not going to remove that as a permission. I'm not going to make it so that she can only run tests, and we would kind of be dead in the water. So I don't think that changing security permissions for her is actually going to solve this either. But maybe if this error happened by a very inexperienced user that I potentially had set up with the wrong permissions, then I likely would come in here and edit the permissions to restrict them from ever being able to do anything besides test specimens. But again, I'm gonna have to talk to Meredith. She's kind of the Blue Hill queen, so I think I'm gonna have to have a conversation with her, because I think she's gonna have some good ideas. But so yeah, so cut scene a little bit in the role playing. Imagine we kind of fast forward 12 hours where me as a lab manager, I get a chance to take Meredith aside and let her know what happened, and try to brainstorm some ideas from her perspective as to how we could actually prevent this from happening in the future. So now kind of cut back to the role playing, and now I'm logged in, Meredith. So maybe I know that we just talked through some different ideas, and I really liked kind of where your head was at. So if you could try to go into here, I can log out, allow you to log back in to try to explain this a little bit more clearly for me in the method itself. So there you go. So can you still have control, correct? All right, cool.
Yep, perfect. Yeah, all right, so let's walk through some of the thoughts I had on ways within the method we can prevent this issue from happening again. So I'm going to open up our sample from yesterday, and then we can walk through a couple different ideas. to, you know, prevent somebody from accidentally making the same mistake, because we really want to avoid that going forward.
So I think you might have went into a new sample, but we'll.
Okay. Well, oh yeah, you're right. All right, we're gonna go back then and open up the one with data in it so we can show what that looks like with some results that are already there.
Yeah.
So if I go into test, oh, it's taking its time to load, that's why.
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, let it do its thing. It is certainly a little bit slower on them.
with yeah,
Everything
go
running.
to webinar.
But what were I think you had two main approaches that I think we're going to go through, and they're both method-based. So they're not necessarily traceability focused, but I think that you had convinced me when we were talking
Yeah.
that
Traceability really helped us identify where the problems came up, but we can still solve those problems at a method level instead of using the traceability settings like you mentioned.
Here, let me actively browse to them.
Okay.
That might be a little bit quicker. All right, so let me grab. So this was the 25th batch 1, right? There it is. I found it.
Perfect.
Open that up.
All right. Another second here. Then I can walk you through.
Remember to set your travel limits, everyone. This is
a good
a
reminder.
bad habit to get into. It's a bad habit to forget to set your limits.
All right, there we go. So yeah, there's kind of two areas that I think we can make some improvements to the method so that an operator using this will avoid making the same mistake and potentially catch this error before it even gets submitted to the report that Dan looked at. So the first thing that I identify here is this test rate dropdown. That's an operator input. So this is certainly convenient if you're switching between test rates within the same method, but you can see with 2 and 5 being right next to each other, how easily somebody could accidentally click the wrong test rate here, which is what happened in the sample that I ran yesterday that Dan caught at audit. So the first thing we're going to do is go into our method and just get rid of this as an operator input. So I go into workspace and then go into my operator inputs. And so we have test rate right here. And I'm just going to get rid of this. So if I go back to my test screen now, you'll see that it's gone, which is what we want. So in order to then change how my test rate is controlled within the method, I'm going to go into my specimen choice inputs, which is where that dropdown was created basically. So you can see test rate, and I'm going to go in and edit this and unlink it. So this way I'll be allowed to set up my test rate elsewhere within my method. So if I go into link and remove this link here, that's no longer connected at all. And this dropdown still exists, but it's just hidden and we won't use that in our method. So another option I could do is where it says dumbbell type. So this we're going to leave. This is, if you're using different size specimens within ISO 527, something our operators will pick when they start a batch of testing. So I could go in here and instead link my test speed to my dumbbell type. It's a drop down we're already picking. That way, you're not having to select it separately. So I could go in and say test and add rate 1. But that still leaves room for error if somebody accidentally picks the wrong dumbbell type. So I think in this case, that's probably not the best solution. So I think in order to really just avoid, any accidents and make this as foolproof as possible, I'm just going to go into my test control and I'm just going to set one constant rate for this test. the vast majority of the time we're testing at 5 millimeters per minute anyway. So this way, you know, I'm just going to keep it behind the scenes and make sure that it always is going to run at that correct rate, and nothing that anyone inputs on this operator screen will affect that in any way. So this way we can really avoid that same issue from happening again. The other option that we have is, you know, making it more obvious within the results that something is out of spec much earlier in the process. So like I mentioned, I mean, I'm referencing this mean value and then using a paper reference table to see if that falls within our specs. But there's a couple options within the software to make it a lot more obvious when I run the test that it's either within spec or out of spec. So the first thing I can do is on my layout here, I can add a pass-fail indicator. So I'm going to split this in half. And over here, I'm going to add my pass-fail. So, and then we'll set this up in a second. All right. And I'm going to exit this. So we'll come back to this in a second. So now when I go into my method, and then I look at my results. So we're looking primarily at, oh, there it is. Primarily looking at this tensile strength. That's what I've been referencing. So within results here, you have the option of adding failure bounds on both each individual results as well as the mean for this whole batch. So I'm going to go in here and what was our mean value? Right. Okay. So the range that we want for the mean value is somewhere from 156 to 162. And then the range for my individual samples is,
I think you,
oh, did I do that wrong?
Yeah.
Upper and lower. Whoops. So my upper bound is 162 and my lower bound is 156.
Perfect.
My upper bound for my results is 164. Oh, there we go, 164. And my lower bound is 154. So that's what I have on my paper reference table. So let's see if that would have tipped us off that something was off when I ran these tests. So, yep, yeah, so looking at this, the overall mean is still within spec, right? I have no indication that this is out of tolerance, but these last 4 tests that I ran at that slower test rate were below what our accepted range is. So this is really a great way to really quickly see that something is off here. And the fact that there are 4 in a row, you know, indicates that maybe there's something wrong either with that batch or with the, you know, parameters for the test itself, because that seems to be a pattern. It's not just, you know, 1 out of 8 that failed. 4 in a row really indicates that there might be something wrong here. So
Yeah,
both, you know,
yeah, like
yeah.
I think this is going to be the way to go. I think, and I think I'm pretty sure that we can see those minus signs, those triangles on the report itself. So when you're looking at the report, when we're approving it, when I'm double checking it, that it'll be blatantly obvious. It's not something that just appears here. It's something that we can actually see on the report, which is great.
Yeah, so we can have it documented for future and, you know, kept within our audit trail for sure.
Yep, and this, like you admit, like we had the process put in place with our specs kind of taped to the system or sitting next to the system, and we're doing that cross-referencing. That is literally a manual. I'm looking at the results now. I'm looking at the spec sheet just to double check, where this just seems like a better process. There's no thought really involved, and there's that additional chance for human error that we're kind of eliminating. So I think I like this pass fail.
Great.
Was that everything that you kind of had in mind? I forget if there was something else that you had mentioned, or if that's it.
No, it was just those 2, you know, removing the test feed from this screen to prevent any accidents there, and just making it really obvious when something falls without a spec. I think those will kind of address the issues that we came across here.
Okay, Fantastic. And then do you think from your point of view, now I'm thinking back to, I was looking at our traceability, our signature settings, that, like, right now how we have that as the methods themselves don't require any approval. I think it might be worthwhile so changes like this that we're making to the method that you're making right now, that I'd like to allow you to be able to do that, of course, because you know better than I. But in terms of, I would like to have oversight when these things happen, just to make sure that it kind of aligns with my goals for the lab. How do you feel about me switching that signature for methods from none to similar to our PDF reports to secondary, so that when you make this change, I can actually see it and we can have a second set of eyes approve it?
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. We can sit down, have a conversation like this. I can show you what I did, and if you need further justification than what's already there in the audit trail, but it prompts the conversation and you have some oversight as to what's going on. I think that makes sense.
Okay, lovely. All right, well, that's our role playing. We're gonna cut scene again, and so thank you, Meredith.
Some Oscar award-winning performances.
We should have come up with like actually like fun names, but we failed. Okay, so I'm gonna jump back into the PowerPoint. I see we have 13 minutes left. I got one last slide for lessons learned, and then we can jump into some questions. Okay, let me just make sure we're good here. So we just did the demo. Okay, so lessons learned, just to wrap up. I mean, we all know that mistakes happen, but it's really how we address them that separates a high quality from a low quality supplier. And for materials tests specifically, we need to determine the impact of this error. So was this actually a bad batch, or was this just a bad test? So like the use case we just went through, it was just a bad test. That likely I'd have Meredith run some more samples just to make sure that our suspicion was correct. But at the end of the day, this was kind of a bad test, not a bad batch. And so if it is a bad test, because something does get modified, when did the change occur? So then this will help answer the next question of how many tests ran before we actually caught the error. So in the demo, the error was isolated to the sample that Meredith ran, so it wouldn't have persisted. But in other cases, a method could be unintentionally changed, and weeks could pass and hundreds of tests could be skewed. So this is definitely important to know. And then finally, why a change occurred is useful. So did someone do this knowingly? They had some intention in mind, or it was this kind of slipped through the cracks and it was entirely unintentional? And answering all of these questions becomes much easier when traceability is enabled. Some of them you can't answer at all if you don't have traceability, but certainly all of them become quite a bit easier to answer. And then after the impact of the mistake is known, what options are at your disposal to make it sure that it doesn't happen again? Should you set up stricter permissions, or maybe you use the pass-fail indication as we just set up, or maybe we should change the approval requirements again like we did. So each option is going to have a different cost. So whether that shows up as a financial investment, or whether you've added time to a particular task, or it could be something that maybe your operators just don't want to have to do. But given each of the costs, you're going to have to make a decision. But the underlying point here is that a lab with traceability will have more options at their disposal. And a final takeaway that I hope has become clear through this webinar is that Bluehill's security and traceability are very flexible. Every lab is different. They have different operators. They serve different customers. Some are going to have be held to a higher regulation than others. Some might run 100 times more tests than another. But the flexibility to configure user permissions and traceability settings to either free up or to lock down the software to meet your lab's needs is really an important note that I'd like to end on. And with that, we'd like to again thank you for your time and attention. And Meredith and I will be directing our attention to the questions that you have all been submitting. And I'm going to jump back into Bluehill Universal rather than this boring slide in case poking around the software will help answer any of the questions that come up. So again, thanks. All right, so have we been monitoring questions? Have much come in? I know we have a number of questions that came in before the webinar started.
Yeah, so let's start with a couple of those that came in ahead of time, and please, feel free to submit anything else that comes to mind. So one of the first questions we got, that's a pretty common question, is somebody wrote, I have Bluehill Universal already on a few Instrons in my lab. How do I know if traceability can be installed? So traceability is available as a additional option on version 4.18 or higher. Bluehill 4.18 came out in early 2020. So if your software license is older than that, you will have to upgrade to the latest software in order to purchase traceability. And another question that we got is, does the approver need to be at the device? And the answer to that is yes. So approvals, viewing of the audit trail, and anything else within traceability occurs on the PC that is directly connected to the Instron frame. Another question that we see a lot is, we currently use Compliance Builder that was sold to us for use with Bluehill Universal. How does this new module affect the Compliance Builder use and relationship? So prior to offering traceability, Instron had partnered with the software company Zybion to offer Compliance Builder to our customers that required a compliance solution. And so Compliance Builder is a Windows-based solution that is still being sold and supported by Zybion. Its function is not impacted by traceability, so nothing will break if both are being used on the same system. But of course, they are somewhat redundant in their functionality. And one important difference to highlight is really the what in that who, what, when, why that we talked about that traceability really addresses. So traceability is integrated into Bluehill, so it knows exactly what has changed, whereas other compliance solutions like Compliance Builder know that the file was changed, but they don't inherently know what within the file was altered. So knowing what changed can save a lot of time when reviewing a method or a test, which is kind of what we dug into here. So knowing that it was specifically the test rate, something like that. So another question that somebody submitted was, what kind of database does this use? Is it Access or SQL, or will it work with the existing CB database and Trend Tracker database? So the database used for the audit trail is a local Microsoft SQL Express database, and it's separate from Trend Tracker and Compliance Builder. For another question that we've gotten, so for our validation process, we always get the qualification documents for our Instron system. Do you have these available for all the new functionality of traceability? And the answer is yes. So at installation of the system or software upgrade, Instron service can provide IQ and OQ documentation for Bluehill Universal and any calculations you require, and specifically for the traceability feature set as well. Another question we've gotten, if a method is currently up to Rev 5, can you go back and run under Rev 3? And currently, no. You can see all the changes that were made between Rev 3 and Rev 5 and modify the method to go back to your parameters that were set at Rev 3, but this does require manually updating the method to revert to what was included in that version. Let's see, so does the software notify you when you have to perform a review, or do you have to check the traceability tab each time you log in? So currently the software does not notify the user that an approval or rejection has been made. To check items that are waiting for review, the user needs to log in. But similar to the demo, if reports are the only file that need reviewing, Bluehill's email export function can be used to notify somebody that a test is complete. So you can set up the method to automatically email that PDF to somebody, but this does not apply to other non-results related approvals. So for a method or a report template, anything like that. Dan, do we got any other questions that have been coming in? Let's see.
So yeah, there was a question you kind of had answered, or a duplicate question about if the software can be accessed remotely. So our existing traceability solution is local to the PC that the Instron is connected to. So the audit trail itself is held locally on a SQL Express database that's installed when that system has traceability installed on it. So if you have two systems, that you'd have to be doing these things in isolation on those two systems at this point in time. What are some other questions? So we have a few coming in. Is it possible to remove report or method in the Windows system? So that's kind of like if you imagine that you're saving files somewhere locally or maybe on a network drive and you're going through the Windows Explorer, can someone when they're on a computer delete or move those methods? And that's going to be a yes. The Bluehill software can't control necessarily what you're doing from the Windows Explorer point of view, but because this is something that is very important for many labs, that generally IT at those companies will lock down different folder structures to prevent this from happening. And we have some documentation that we've given customers who maybe not be familiar with how to control your Windows file structure, and that can be provided. But basically, you have to go in from an administrator point of view and protect folders where you're saving different Bluehill files to prevent that from happening. All right, see what other questions. I know we're running short on time. I think that might be it. We answered a question about what Compliance Builder was. So I don't see anything else. So I think we're a couple minutes from the end. So at this point in time, I think I'm gonna hand things back over to our gracious host, Nick. You there, Nick?
Yep, I'm here.
All right. Nice.
All right, so thanks so much, Dan and Meredith. That was great. I do enjoy the role play act, so I will be submitting that for consideration in this upcoming award season. And then just for anybody that did ask questions, or if questions do come in that we don't address yet, we can certainly follow up with you by email afterwards. I also want to point out that we have the traceability module PDF as an available download. Dan mentioned a Bluehill security webinar that we hosted. When I do a follow-up email, I'm going to have today's recording along with the slide deck, and also share a link to that Bluehill security webinar just so you can check that out in case you're curious more, want to dig more into that security aspect. And then our next webinar is going to be scheduled for April 29th, when our composites expert, Ian McIntaggart, will be hosting a session on the challenges of composites testing. So actually, I'm going to drop a link to that in the chat real quick, in case you'd like to sign up. Otherwise, it is available on our website. Let's see here. I apparently just sent a blank message, so we're going to retry that. And there we go. Cool. So yeah, with that said, thanks so much, Dan and Meredith. Great presentation. And also thanks to all of you for attending. We do really appreciate your time. I know an hour is a lot to give away in your day, so we really, really appreciate you stopping by. Stay healthy, everyone, and we hope to see you again next time.